All right, tell me, because you brought up, basically you were talking about niacin and the human evolution, brain
Yes,
evolution.
yes.
That's fascinating. Tell me about it.
Well, I'm actually writing a book called Evolution Bites Back. And so I've been exploring human evolution, and one of the people who's world authority on it is a guy called Robin Dunbar.
Yeah, I heard about it.
And this is just an amazing book. And I've been very interested in, see, as a dentist, we get to see two things that are quite significant locally, but the implications orally are just systemically are huge. One is tooth decay, which is still the biggest non-communicable disease known to man, woman, or child. And the other is physical degeneration. And by that, I mean, we have evolved to have 32 teeth.
Yeah.
And yet 95% of the population do not have 32 teeth. They have crowded, small, narrow jaws and crowded teeth, and that has implications on upper airway. The other thing that has fascinated me, particularly as the vegan movement is gaining strength and as meat is being demonized, is our human journey from apes to the current day and the growth of brain size during that time, and what were some of the drivers for cranial growth. For example, chimpanzees have a brain size of about 400 cc's. 400 cc's. So Australopithecus, which was our very early ancestors, Australopithecus, which started around 4 million years ago, had similarly 400 cc's. And
so
then
much smaller than our
much smaller brain. And then things started to change as we changed our diet. And as our food became more nutrient dense, our brain size increased. Homo habilis was our next ancestor, 600 cc's. Homo erectus, our next ancestor, 800 cc's. This is where things started to get interesting, because we really started to not only have meat, which was a nutrient-dense food, but we also started to use fire, and that made a lot more food bioavailable. And then we got
about what, 2 million years ago?
Homo erectus, about 1.8, 1.8 million years. Yep. And then we brain size started to grow to where it reached a size that is actually bigger than it is now. A modern human's brain size has gone down.
Yeah, that's what I read too.
Yes. And we got to
after the agriculture, actually.
That was the big one. And we got to a point where we were about 1,450 cc's. So if you think about chimpanzees and Australopithecus, because that was significant, we got up on 2 feet at that point, bipedal. That was 400 cc's. Then around 200,000 years ago, we were at this point where we were 1,450 cc's. Now, interestingly, Neanderthals have a bigger brain. They're around 1,600 cc's, but they have a much bigger orbital cortex. So they have the bulge at the back of the head, meaning they have a larger orbital visual cortex. And it's postulated that that's because they inhabited Northern European climates, and there were more periods of darkness, and so they had to become more visually acute. But what's always fascinated me is if you took a Homo sapien of 200,000 years ago and you transported them to today, they would be indistinguishable from us today. So what happened 70,000 years ago that began this migration out of Africa, and not only out of Africa, but it took us right across Europe, North America, down to the tip of South America, and to Australia. I mean, in Australia, we were there 65,000 years ago, our indigenous Aboriginal. So there was this incredible surge 70,000 years ago. And what could have driven that surge? Well, obviously, climate would have played a significant role. But what was so interesting in this book, which is what I shared with the Orthomolecular news service, because I just thought, wow, this is a real aha moment for me, is he says in passing, about 70,000 years ago, we'd already been consuming meat, we'd already been cooking using fire, but about 70,000 years ago, we began a symbiotic relationship with tuberculosis bacterium. And tuberculosis bacterium comes in two forms. One is a human form, which was non-pathogenic until we moved into our Neolithic times of living in close-knit communities, not just close-knit population, but in close contact with our animals. And so there's a bovine strain of tuberculosis bacteria, which is quite pathogenic. But the interesting thing about 70,000 years ago, this symbiotic relationship, like we have with many bacteria. I mean, you know, we need our microbiome. Arguably, we are just vehicles for a microbiome.
That is true. We're not really us, you know.
No, we're not really us. We're just here to make sure the microbiome is well nourished. And if it is, then we benefit from it. Well, 70,000 years ago, we started a relationship with tuberculosis bacterium. And in this book, he says one of the things that bacteria does very well is produce nicotinamide, or B3. And that, of course, has very profound impact on brain function. And particularly at times when perhaps meat may not be as available, this relationship becomes really important. So I thought, well, I wanted to share that with the Orthomolecular News Service, because I know that, you know, Abraham Hoffa, who is...
Yeah, it was big on that.
He was very big on that. And I know there are many in this group that would know far more about it than me.
Yeah, it seems to me that was the very first vitamin that's been clinically studied in high dose. Am I right? The niacin.
Sorry, Richard.
No, what I'm saying is that Dr. Hoffer, he back in the 1950s started using high dose niacin. To me, that seems to be the very first vitamin that's used in high doses for clinical treatment.
Yeah, I mean, he was making all sorts of connections with neurological mental health conditions and B3. So yeah, I mean, I think Andrew and the group have said many times that he was a major force in this perhaps the father of orthomolecular medicine. Yeah.
So coming back to your question, so you were saying which form of this TB, which is the TB human form, that is
non-pathogenic.
So that actually produces niacinamide.
Apparently, yes.
So in our normal gut.
Yes. The problem with TB, like many microbes and viruses, is when it I think it's called zoonotic. You know, when it comes from the animal and jumps species, and that's when it became pathogenic in human culture, is when we were in much tighter communities, sedentary communities, in close proximity with the animals, and particularly the bovine type of tuberculosis. But it's all part of a journey, really, for me, of exploring what nutrient dense means, number one, and that has led me into a whole area of regenerative agriculture, because you know, I've been interested in regenerative agriculture for about the last 20 years when I got introduced to holistic land management, and I've been interested in holistic healthcare for over 40 years. And then I realized, actually, there are so many similarities between holistic land management and holistic healthcare. For example, microbiome. The microbiome in the mouth, the microbiome in the gut. The more diverse the microbiome is, the healthier you are and the more resilient you are. And similarly in the soil, you know, what provides a nutrient-dense diet? It's the food we eat. But you can grow food using nitrogen, phosphate, and phosphorus. You know, these are superphosphate fertilizer. But in fact, in healthy food, in nutrient-dense food, I think there are like 50 or 60 of the elements of the periodic table that we need in our body. And the only way that becomes available is for the microbes within the soil and the mycorrhizal fungi within the soil to break down the minerals and make them available to the plants which we eat or which animals that we eat. And so this whole idea of regenerative agriculture and this idea of enabling or dominating nature, you know, industrial agriculture tries to dominate nature. And this is true of how we approach chronic disease management as well. Whereas if we enable nature and support nature, then we can deliver good health, which is a wonderful concept rather than just managing chronic disease. So this kind of all fits into a more holistic picture that's fascinated me for some time.
You just mentioned about another thing that's happening right here, it's concerning here in the United States, is that I don't know if you noticed that I think the FDA recently just passed about some sort of regulation on the small scale meat production or something like that. I guess you know what I'm talking about. Basically, this regulation again assists or helps these bigger agricultural farms like Bill Gates, because he's trying to say, no, don't eat these, land, raise the farmland, you're gonna start eating my lab grown meats. He's going crazy. But they want to control everything. They've been controlling our medicines. They've been controlling our agricultural products. Now they want to control the meats that we're going to eat.
Yes. I know this is a really disturbing trend. And look, I've been aware of the influence of the chemical, food and pharmaceutical industry on healthcare for the last 30, 35 years. I mean, my big epiphany as a new graduate in dentistry was to learn that what I had learned.
Dentist by training.
I am a dentist by training.
Oh, okay.
And so what was the epiphany for me shortly after I graduated in 1980, or 1978, actually, but in 1980 was the epiphany when someone said to me, the filling material you are using releases mercury. And I said, no, that's not true. The university, my lectures, my professors all told me, my associations all told me that mercury was locked into the filling. And when I learnt that wasn't the case, it was the beginning of questioning authority. So I have been following this story for at least the last 35 years. But even me, being aware of that, have been shocked about what's gone on in the last 2 years at the level of influence. I mean, the level of influence is just, I think it's referred to as the Great Reset. I think it is part of the World Economic Forum. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just a very sophisticated business model that's working incredibly well. And if evidence is anything to go by, and I think we're often told we should look at the evidence, I think there's been a redistribution of wealth in the last 2 years of something like $3.8 trillion upwards.
Oh my God.
And this is part of a much bigger business plan called the Great Reset.
I totally agree with you. I begin to realize many of us, like you and me, I had a very similar journey. The very first time I got exposed to this was by a book. Curious enough, I remember it was a small book, like this small. I cannot remember. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it anymore. it was back 30 years ago, a little pamphlet. The title is something like secrets the FDA doesn't want you to know about, something like that. So
yes,
and that catches my attention. What people are curious about secrets. Anyways, then I read about vitamin C.
Yes,
that's first time I heard about vitamin C, Linus Pauling, all his work and everything. Then of course, I start taking vitamin C. Well, this is good,
Yes.
Then, but again, I still did not really quite comprehend, the business model. That's what you're just talking about. Until this time, 2 years ago, I was really upset because just like I'm glad to tell you that actually I am being inducted into the Hall of Fame next week.
Wow!
Thank you. Yeah. So they asked me to prepare a speech, which I already did. Like I mentioning on that, my speech is that then I began to realize actually evidence is there. I don't think there's a problem with the evidence-based method. The problem is that they pick the evidence they want.
That's right.
They leave out tremendous amount of evidence. So like vitamin C, there's over 70,000 articles. Even hydrogen peroxide. Thomas Levy's book.
Yes, and I'm grateful to Thomas. I've interviewed him on my podcast several times, twice as I have you. And I got COVID a few weeks ago, and I'm very grateful.
Oh, you did?
I did, and I followed the FLCC protocols as well as Thomas Levy's suggestion about hydrogen peroxide, and I was fine. I mean, I've been fine.
Yeah. So when I mention about this thing, everybody says I'm crazy.
Yes.
I said, do you realize? I said, because I've been gentle, polite. I said, you know what? I do not make a recommendation unless I have really studied. I said, I have studied. Have you? There are tens of thousands of research papers on this thing about safety. And I said, Thomas Levy, in his book, will summarize this. So would you bother to read it? But unfortunately, these are all excellent quality evidence, but they wouldn't mention.
Yeah. Well, I've often said that ignorance is a wonderful thing. I practice it regularly, and I learn a lot because of it. But when ignorance is combined with ego, arrogance, and hubris, and it informs public health policy, then people's lives are at stake. And it is that ego, arrogance, and hubris that is on display when people say, oh, there's no evidence to support the use. I mean, for example, Richard, at the beginning of the pandemic here in Australia, at the time I was president of the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, ACNEM, and Ian Brighthope, who was the founder and president for many years, wrote letters to the National Health and Medical Research Council, to the federal government, to the AMA, the Australian Medical Association, the TGA, the equivalent of our FDA, and said, look, at the very least, provide those that are vulnerable, particularly in aged care, with vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, and vitamin C, at the very least. And here are 100 references to support what I'm saying. And we got a letter, and he asked me to be a co-signatory on that. I was very proud to do it. And we got a reply from the TGA, our FDA, if you like, saying insufficient evidence to support the use of vitamin D for this issue. And what is so annoying about this is that when drugs like molnupiravir or Paxlovid came out, and 2 or 3 studies were provided by the drug companies, the TGA immediately rushed it through as though this was unquestioning.
I know.
So it's just, I think actually criminal actions I think people need to be held accountable on a manslaughter charge.
Yeah, actually what I've been reading is, I have to say, here I physically am here in the United States. I do feel the tide is changing here. We all know about Elon Musk buying out the Twitter. The Truth Social of Trump is alive. And I do know that, the 22 candidates supported by Trump all won the primary in Republican primaries. And so there's a lot of hope that one of the two chambers of the Congress very likely will turn Republican. So I do feel light at the end of the tunnel over here, because I was talking about with Tom Levy yesterday, Tom Levy on this issue. So actually coming back to Australia, it seemed like recently, I shouldn't talk about politics of mainland China because it's a lot more serious. You know what I mean?
And you were there. You were there at the coalface for 6 months or 9 months. How long were you there for?
Almost a year.
Oh, wow.
Almost a year, But as I got the impression that because I heard that some people were protesting on the streets of Sydney or not Montreal, but Sydney, I guess, or your capital.
Yeah, Canberra.
Yeah. Anyway, so they were arrested.
Yes. Oh, look,
because people in Australia, actually, there's really no freedom of speech. Is that true?
Well, it is that protest, which friends of mine went down in Canberra, and there would have been 200,000 or 300,000 people down there. Yeah, hard to know. It was not reported at all in the media. And I've stopped calling the news services. They are not news services. They are media outlets, and it was not reported. And look, we have capture. There is. Hang on, sorry, Richard, I've lost you there for a moment. We have capture, which is, it cuts across so many different. I'll give you another example, and I have done a podcast which is coming out in a few weeks' time, which there was a forum run by the Australian government 2 weeks ago, a 2-hour forum on early treatment for COVID, right? Now, what was so remarkable about this was that after 26 months of the outbreak of the pandemic, the Australian government now wants to focus on treatment for those that are vulnerable and high risk, so harm minimisation. And what was this 2-hour forum focused on? Or basically, there were more, but basically 4 drugs: Remdesivir, Molnupiravir, Paxlovid, and Sotrovimab. And what was ironic about this was that 2 weeks before that, the BMJ published an article called The Illusion of Evidence-Based Medicine, and spoke about key opinion leaders, or in marketing parlance, KOLs, and product champions. And what I saw in this forum, which brought together the leaders in healthcare in Australia, the chief medical officer, the head of the health department, the head of the TGA/FDA in Australia, brought together all of those people. And what we were witnessing was KOLs, key opinion leaders, and product champions in action. They spoke about nothing else but patented drugs. Newly patented drugs that have received an emergency use authorization, which of course absolves them of so much. But it's just shocking to me to see that. So I think we're coming up for an election in the next 2 weeks in Australia, federal election. And my hope is that we have a hung parliament, meaning that there's no clear majority, and that there are independents there, which the government will have to negotiate with. And this is a concept which we haven't seen a lot of in recent times, called democracy. So I think this is it's a very difficult situation here in Australia. I think it is true.
It's harder. It's more harsh over there towards let's say.
I went to a meeting last week, which was held in Sydney, and the Australian of the Year, an ophthalmic surgeon called James Mookie, was giving a lecture talking about diabetes and a low-carb approach to diabetes.
Yeah.
That meeting couldn't be held in Melbourne, Victoria, because Victoria has a law which says everybody who attends a public meeting must be able to show proof of vaccination.
Oh.
And if the organisers cannot verify that, they potentially will be fined up to $200,000.
Oh.
So the organisers chose not to run the meeting in Victoria and instead chose to run it in New South Wales, which doesn't have the draconian measures that are in place in Victoria. Look, it is a problem. It is of concern. There is no question about that. I must say, when I observe things in America, you know, I mean, my goodness, if someone like Donald Trump is the champion for freedom, then I think our society is really in a very serious situation, because I think one could question what Donald Trump's real motivations are, but given his lifelong career and his clear narcissism, I think that you know, and I'm not one way or the other. I think both parties have their pluses and minuses, but
that's actually a good question. You know, my observation, you know, when Donald Trump just went into the office, actually, I felt like he wasn't really presidential. You know,
yeah.
I've never seen a president, you know, on social media every day multiple times.
Yeah,
but I'll tell you, the extreme leftists have really done a great job.
Yes, they've done a hatchet job. They've done a hatchet job,
pushing a lot of people. That includes myself.
Yes,
toward Trump, actually.
Yeah, yeah. No, and look, I mean, look what he said about hydroxychloroquine. You know, and he was right.
Yeah,
you know, he was right. And if hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin had been approved, then emergency use authorization, it would have all been over.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
So I think on that point, you know, I think that is a very, very significant point, which we need to give him credit for.
Yeah, you know, there are a lot of people are also questioning Elon Musk's, you know, true intention of buying Twitter. I say, look, he's much better than all the other people we've got. Okay,
that's right. I mean, if we're trying to protect what was, then I don't think that was worth protecting.
Yeah. Nobody is going to agree with me, and I don't even agree with myself every day, right? Yep. So look at the major points, you know, compared to those leftists, you know, the extremist people, these are so much better, you know. No,
I agree with you. I think the whole left-right polarization, you know, I don't know. I don't know what to believe anymore.
Yeah, I said I don't want to get involved in politics because I'm not that young guy. You know, I only just want to enjoy my own life, do my little things. But unfortunately, politics will not leave me alone.
Yes.
They bother me. You
yes,
know?
I agree.
I have to push it off. I have to push it back.
Yeah.
So I'm involved in politics, you know.
Yeah.
So actually coming back to the, you know, the medical side about the diet, you know, you just alluded to. So I guess you and I will also agree on, you know, the low carb concept.
Yes.
You know, actually, the last 2 years or so, I studied basically pretty extensively on this diet issue. Of course, I've been managing my clinic in the lifestyle management, and you know about weight loss, the very low calorie diet, you know, ketone diet, all these things. For the last 2-3 years, I've been, you know, reading a lot, and you know, you probably also know about the book Carnival Code.
Paul Saladino.
Paul Saladino, and also you know, watched quite a few video presentations on the the ancestral diet, all these things. Actually, I learned quite a bit, like what you just summarized earlier at this, you know, podcast. That humans actually, for the majority of our human evolution time, we were actually carnivores. We were animal eating.
Oh, look, you know, I mean, I think the big step came when we started to introduce meat into our diet, because when you look at, for example, the apes, the chimpanzees, how much time they have to spend, and we only have 24 hours in a day, and we sleep for 8 hours. So you've got to think about what goes on, and these are called, in evolutionary terms, the time budget. How much time is spent hunting and gathering for
That's
nutrients. Right. And so when we are in the, when you're a chimpanzee or gorilla or what, you are spending the best part of your day consuming low nutrient dense foods. But if we can concentrate that into meat, then we have something that gives us more time to develop as a species.
Exactly. Yeah. So actually, that's very true. Also, because I think you on the also molecular boards, you may have seen me, because I think I asked you too about the toxicity. You sent me quite a bit of reference in the past. Basically, I begin to have this sort of feeling is that, simply the kind of Chinese philosophy, like balance. Well, not just Chinese, any culture, right? So basically, on the one side of the equation is the nutrition. On the other side is the anti-nutrients or the toxins. Yeah. So along that sort of line, I've read quite a bit about the agriculture, again, coming back to chemical contamination, glyphosate, the typical example of this. Yeah. And also the processed foods, so many additives and so poor in the, true nutrients. And so based on these, actually, I've been applying basically, I think I told you, I think I want to, next time I want to, if you don't mind, invite you to give a talk on this global picture. I think one time didn't you? Because we formed a low-carb medicine alliance in China.
Yes, no, you invited me, and I think I did provide we talked, I think it was called The Elephant in the Room.
Yes, you did.
I called my talk The Elephant in the Room. That's
right. So basically, diet is critical because of course, I recommend, I supply, because also we do have our own nutrient supplements, because based on my own understanding. However, diet, it should be and is the major source of our nutrition. We can't always take tablets.
Yeah.
And so I've been basically, recommending different on a spectrum from like a keto diet to low carb, and depending on the health situation. And so whatever they do. So actually I have found, recently you probably noticed we reported 2 cases of cardiovascular diseases being reversed. Another thing, actually very critically, I've treated more autoimmune disease patients. A lot of people with skin rash, because I found that's a great category of diseases. Why? Because one picture is worth thousands of words. You don't have to write a long article. Showing 2 pictures.
Yep.
Low carb VC. I have a nickname. I'm called the Pope of VC keto. That's the English translation. Okay. Well, because I've been promoting vitamin C and ketogenic diet way before everybody else knows or heard about the ketogenic diet term. He said, a lot of my colleagues says, you're like a missionary, like a preacher. So anyway, so what I'm saying is that with this spectrum, it looks like, simply 2 pictures, psoriasis, eczema, even quite a few other skin rash, 2 pictures before and after, low carb BC, of course, there's more into it, but so what's your experience in that?
Well, I think your reference to the skin conditions, 80 or 90% of skin conditions are a reflection of digestion. Poor digestion. And, leaky gut is something that has been spoken about by naturopaths, nutritionists, integrative doctors for the last 30, 40 or so years. Now that it's referred to as intestinal permeability, it has gained, people are willing to acknowledge that.
Into the mainstream now.
Yeah. And what's interesting about carb, well, look at the low carb world first, because of all of the 3 macronutrients, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, there are essential amino acids, there are essential fatty acids, there are no essential carbohydrates. So whenever we look at nutritional problems, we're always shown processed food, hamburgers, chips, French fries, pizzas. I would argue that one of the biggest nutritional stresses was the food pyramid, which placed carbohydrates and particularly grains as the foundation. So when people talk about low carb, it means different things to different people. I mean, for example, Atkins, I think initially in the initial phase was about 20 grams of carbohydrate a day, which is very low carb and quite a challenge to maintain. And I know that he went up to about, I think it was about 80 grams as a maintenance dose. And me personally, I've always felt that around 70 to 80 grams of carbohydrate a day was sustainable in our modern world. We still have to go out and live with our friends and go out for dinner and accept dinner invitations. So I think that is, the carbohydrate. But when we get to leaky gut and when we get to autoimmune conditions, we also, I know vegetables are always said they are the foundation of a diet, and I agree they are, but they don't come without their risks. There are salicylates, phytates, oxalates, FODMAPs, nightshades. Vegetables are not everything they're cracked up to be. They're dangerous. Huh?
Yeah. Actually, that's very curious here, because actually I translated Paul Saladino's carnivore code into Chinese.
Oh, right.
And I have heard for more than one person telling me that, Dr. Cheng, I believe everything you are saying. But they told me that, but when about this book, they said I couldn't really recommend to other friends because they were saying you're going extreme. I said, then I realized, I said, the purpose of this book for me to introduce is not necessarily telling everybody to eat a carnivore diet. I said, what I want you to do, like what you just said, is that we need to realize actually vegetables, plants, they don't come without their problems. Do not think meats are bad and plants are good, eat whatever you want. That you may get into a lot of problems.
Yes. Yeah. Well, plants can't move. So they have to protect themselves. And they protect themselves from insects, animals, and in the process, from us. So they've put out all of these things to protect themselves. And that is potentially toxic to humans. And certainly in terms of intestinal permeability, potentially a real problem. I think what's interesting, this is a whole philosophical argument about, is carnivore diet achievable for a planet of 7 billion people, 7.5 billion people? And I think that raises a whole lot of other issues. But I think to your point, Richard, and that is, if someone was having some serious, intractable diseases that they've tried everything for, they've been on the best, whatever the best diet is, they've been on the best diet. Well, stop for a moment. Let's eliminate vegetables, which not many dietary advisors say stop eating vegetables, and let's go down the carnivore path for a month or 2 or 3 and regain our resilience, and then slowly reintroduce and find that balance.
I totally agree, actually, Ron. The next thing I want to do is I want to summarize a few cases that I have picture. Of course, I never report anything without my pictures or lab evidence, because, empty words don't mean much, But we have quite a few cases, these pictures, skin rash. I love these type of patients. Is that for these people, like you mentioned, I always tell them, look, when we start, let's start on a very strict program. Try 3 months. And usually I found that the more acute, the more severe, like a reddish, like a burning inflammation, the more serious like that, actually, the quicker they usually respond. And I say, you get rid of, I just say basically eat a carnivore diet. You have to. You have no choice, right? I'm not asking you to do the rest of your life. But start on this, a lot of antioxidants. Once you resolve, you improve. And, when you reach certain level you want to maintain, then you can play with it. I said, but when you do it meticulous, take notes.
Yes.
See which one offends you.
But I think this is an important point too, Richard. And when we're talking about carnivore, we're talking about meat. Not all meat is equal. And this is where I agree with vegans who feel that the industrial meat production, feedlots, battery hens, pigs that are in confined space. You know, I agree. This is unconscionable. This is wrong ethically.
I agree with you.
But what is wrong for the animal is wrong for us, and it's wrong for the planet. It's not the resource that's the problem, in this case meat, it's how the meat is managed. And if the meat is managed in a regenerative farm, then we have a totally different animal. Firstly, we have an animal living a very healthy and happy life and only has one bad day in their life.
Yeah.
And you know, if we only had one bad day in our life, that would be pretty good. So, you know, the day they die is the worst day of their lives. But up until then, they live a happy and healthy life. But importantly, their fat content is very different. You know, in nature, the proportion of, for example, omega-3 to omega-6, inflammatory and pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, is in the order of 1:1 or 1:3, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, but in a feedlot animal, it is there is practically no omega-3. It's omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory. So not all meat is the same. And I think that's an important point philosophically as well as from a health perspective.
Yeah, actually, what I want to remember, because this is going on a year or two ago, I think you also provided some clues to my question again, because when I was seeking my way of understanding the toxin issue. Basically, right now, I sort of summarized, you know, into Yang also contributed, I believe, you know, quite a few people on that board, is that to me, let's say just simply, of course, it's not that clear, but basically meat and the plants. You know, I try to do comparison. I made a link into a little table back, by the way. So to me, the toxins in the plant-based foods, generally speaking, they are sort of water soluble and fat soluble, because plant foods usually is more, you know, less oily than, right? You know, of course there are some oil, but not as much. So the generally, let's consider it's more of a hydrophilic, basically water soluble. Ketogenic diet, since we are, you know, when we talk about ketogenic diet, carnivore diet, we generally meaning protein should be still maintained, restricted, not like, you know, endless, right? And you know, I don't really agree with, or I don't really like the high protein side of the diet. But a keto diet is more of the fat as energy. So basically, the toxin we deal with is more of fat-soluble toxin. Somebody gave me the idea. So when I start comparing, basically, okay, we just start comparing fat-soluble and water-soluble. And my conclusion is that water-soluble, because our body operates in water usually, biochemical reactions in water. Therefore, water-soluble toxins tend to be more acute, because if it's there, it's going to bother you. And they usually tend to get flushed away more quickly. Whereas fat soluble, well, because it's in oil, it has to be released into the water to interact with our body molecules, whatever. And it may be a little bit slower, more slowly released, but tends to stay longer. Probably tends to be less aggressive. And also, I feel if we are eating more of like a fat-based or animal-based diet, the animal has already processed the toxin. I'm not saying ketogenic diet or meats don't have toxins. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that probably it has processed some of the toxins, and also the toxin concentrated tends to be a little bit more on the fat-soluble side.
Yeah, well, this is another reason, Richard, why I think apart from the ethics of industrial animal agriculture, the actual health of the animal and the chemicals that are required to keep them healthy, or at least alive and marketable, let's not call them healthy, let's call them alive and marketable, that's what we take on as well. And that's another reason why, and it's similarly with plants too. And I mentioned that you can make a plant look very good and take it to market with just 3 or 4 chemicals in a fertilizer, but it's not nutrient dense. And that is, it looks good in the supermarket shelf, but it's not nutrient dense. And that's why, you know, it's so interesting, because in regenerative agriculture, there are 5 cycles that are acknowledged as being important. The first is the solar cycle, which is all about photosynthesis. The second is the water cycle, which means that water is absorbed into the soil. And the only way that can really happen is for the soil to have organic matter in it. But the third one is the soil mineral cycle, which is all about the relationship of the plant with the microbes and the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. And the fourth cycle is biodiversity. Again, the more biodiverse, the better. And the fifth cycle is arguably the most important, and that is the human social cycle, which includes the farmer who makes the decision about how the food is grown, and you and I as consumers who decide which form of farming we're going to support. And so that they are the 5 cycles which deliver us, hopefully, a nutrient-dense diet, be it meat that is not toxic, or plants that are not subject to pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and are not nutrient-dense. So, you know, this is why I think for us all to engage in how our food is grown is a really important issue.
That's a great point. Now, how are you involved? I mean, what, for example, I know about this, but I haven't been really directly involved in anything because I don't know what to do. I mean, what's your suggestion there? Yeah,
well, look, I think in America, the Weston A. Price Foundation is an excellent research.
I thought that, you know, Weston Price.
Yeah, and interestingly, you see, Weston Price went out in the 1920s and 30s to find out what caused the epidemic of tooth decay. And what he found was much, much more than that. And I would argue his research is arguably the most important research that's ever been done in human nutrition, because he took then in the 1920s diets from ancestral villages that were on ancestral diets. So they weren't on a paleo diet. He went all around the world to North America, to the Andes, to Australia, to Polynesia, to the Swiss Highlands, to the Hebrides. And what he found, and he came back with all different food samples: seafood, oats, dairy, rye bread, you name it. And he looked at that, and the common denominator that he found in all those ancestral diets was, and this is the 1920s and 30s, so I'm not sure our nutrition is any better now than it was then.
I think it's worse.
It's worse. The soils are much worse conditions. The fertilizers are much higher in use. But then he found 10 times the amount of water-soluble vitamins and minerals in ancestral diet to Western diet, and 4 times the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and he called it activator X, but it was vitamin K, and of course E, fat-soluble vitamins 4 times higher in ancestral diets. And the best source of those fat-soluble vitamins were animals raised on pasture.
Yeah.
So you know, these are really important. So if you're asking me what's the best, where's the best place, I think the Weston A. Price Foundation is an excellent place to start. I would also include in that the Savory Institute, Alan Savory, who has written the book on holistic land management. And I had the privilege of interviewing Alan Savory, and I consider him to be one of my all-time heroes. And he said to me, and this was particularly important for us all, he said, Ron, if you are expecting the change to come from above, and by that I don't think he was talking about God, I think he was talking about governments, you're going to be waiting a long time. The change has to come from the ground up, from people like you and me, and from organizations like the Orthomolecular News Service and the Weston A. Price Foundation and the Savory Institute. You know, this is what has to be, and we need to engage. So I think Weston A. Price and the Savory Institute are 2 excellent places that I would start.
Yeah, actually, that's a great idea, because I realized through these last 2 years as well is that, you know, for example, writing papers, all these things, I had this conversation with Andrew Sau. And then I realized, well, let's not waste time preaching to the deaf ears. They don't, no matter, because I received so many invitations to write more on vitamin C. I said, look, those people who don't want to read it, no matter how much you read, like you saw on it, there are 12 new clinical trials that show COVID, VC is effective against COVID, but nobody's listening.
No.
Producing one more, is it going to change? No. So let's just talk to people who really want to hear.
I agree.
Ground up.
Yep, I
talk
agree.
To the consumers.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you, because the only place to go is, talking to the consumers directly. So I actually, I've been so busy on the Chinese side. It's hard. It's a lot of work, writing up a summary. But now I begin to be more active on the Twitter on the English side is because, yes, they just try to preach, send out the information repeatedly.
Yes.
Talking to the consumers, influencing one at a time, that's all we can.
Well, I think at the end of the day, Richard, and you've been in practice probably for as long. I mean, I've been in practice for over 40 years now, and I've gone through.
We're similar. I was born in 1959.
59. I've got more years. I'm 55. 1955, not 55 years old. But my point is that in my early career, I became very evangelical about all sorts of things. At one stage, it was mercury amalgam in fillings. At another stage, it was the Weston A. Price Foundation and nutrient-dense diets. And another stage, it was whatever it was, And what I've realized is that I just have to calm down a little bit. I have to find that balance in my own life between making a difference to those that want to hear it and not feeling offended or try to be evangelical to everybody. It's not my responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely wrong. Actually, that's what I learned too, because over the, particularly last couple, it's been going on maybe 6-7 years. I didn't mean to actually to go to China to preach. Just be a physician. It's my natural job to talk to my patients all the time, right? So, most of us are pretty talkative. So I just start talking, and then I realize I'm at the different conferences. Of course, early on, a lot of people were. Even yesterday, I got a little bit sort of upset because there was another person trying to promote also molecular medicine about the incoming conference. And one person, quoting that the social media from like a Quack Watch or something about, Linus Pauling. I got a little mad as I said, hey, look, if you read that stuff, you probably don't belong here. But the point I want to make is that I learned along my years, I am not going to argue with anybody about it anymore. I am only going to preach the message I believe are right. You don't agree? That's fine with me. I'm not going to bother.
Yeah. What I find most interesting, and I've said this to people in a public forum, I've said I've been surprised during this pandemic how many people have unwittingly become marketing and compliance officers for an industry that has repeatedly been found guilty of fraud, illegal marketing, and literally cost tens of thousands and in some cases hundreds of thousands of lives. And what's so interesting about Quackwatch is you will never hear Quackwatch draw your attention to anything that the pharmaceutical industry has been found guilty of. So, take that for what it's worth. I think it's a part of the marketing branch of the pharmaceutical industry referred to as Quackwatch. I think it deserves as much respect as, perhaps like a bit of dog dirt on the ground. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, I tend to be the optimistic person. Like I mentioned.
Good. We need that, Richard. We need optimism.
Yeah. What I'm saying, I do feel it is coming, is that here, with the the MAGA movement here in the United States, with the recent buyout, because the extreme leftist party has really gone way too far. Even the mother, I'm sure you saw on Twitter of Elon Musk's, this diagram, because I feel like I was probably in the center, slightly to the right side. But it wasn't that much. I didn't change. I don't think I changed. It's also that they have gone too far left, So my point is that I do feel, with the social, because here in the United States, this is again probably going to influence the worldwide democracies is that, first of all, who is there to decide who is this, what is this information, about this truth department in the US government? Yeah. Who are you to decide I'm wrong and right? Like I just mentioned, if it's illegal, sue, right? Otherwise, leave it alone.
Mm-hmm. So, gee, Richard, I'm pleased to hear you say you're optimistic, because I've just been struck by how coordinated the Great Reset is. And the Great Reset is all about demonizing meat, lab-grown meat, controlling media. I mean, I think Robert Kennedy Jr.'s book, The Real Anthony Fauci, is an incredible document, and particularly when one reads the last chapter there, which outlines all of the games that were played leading up to this pandemic. I mean, we're talking about one of the most sophisticated business model in human history.
Everything happening, I think, right? Because all these things are happening at the same time. Yes. It's like a final showdown.
Yes, which to your point about being an optimist, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I think this is what's kind of, like I was talking to Tom yesterday about this, is that I do feel, of course, big things first is that, first of all, here in the United States, we have to make sure that the election system is not regular, is right. So that's in the future, we can have more honest elections. Now, in order for that to happen, you got to have the majority in the Congress. Right now here in the United States Congress, you don't hear much about these lawsuits right now, is because the Democrats still controlling. Mm-hmm. And so let's change that. Once that happens, I'm pretty sure, including Fauci, because he's the on top representative of all the evil on the COVID side. Yeah. So investigations will be launched, all these, so those senators, all these people, and also on the social media side, I'm pretty sure people, I'm not the only one, so there are a lot of people will be starting investigating and correcting who is there to be the clock watch and the truth, censoring, who gave you the right to censor other people, shut down, like you mentioned, you have hundreds of references, they don't care. And with 2 studies, you pass through. That's who gave you that standard? So I think, that is coming. And here, the beauty, I feel, in the United States, at least, is that the more evil they did, the more mobilized the people. I mean, I wasn't a political person. Of course, I'm always opinionated, like Ms. However, this really angered me.
Yes. So, tell me, Richard, you're in China, and I remember you giving a talk to ACNEM, to the Australasian College, at the time, and you were talking about group protected immunity and the use of, is the message better received in China than it is in America about vitamin C and alternatives?
I don't have the percentage. I cannot say which is better.
Right.
I think at least on the people who know me.
Yes.
Let me put this way. I suddenly found that I have a lot more followers, not suddenly, over the past 2 years than before, both in China and also on, internationally as well. And these people mostly believe in what I say. Yeah. And of course, this is still minority. For example, in China, unfortunately, what's happening in China is it is no longer a scientific discussion.
No.
And you know what I'm talking about. Actually, even on some, because it's so right now over there, it's really, to some people on top, it's like nearly life and death struggle. See what I mean? Yeah. Because it's about, like you said, you were having an election, but over there, they're having a turnover in about 6 months from now of the government, of the top leader.
Yeah.
And you know what's going on. The top leader, they didn't want to leave, but other people want to go. And so they already said it openly, this COVID-19 is no longer, I mean, they didn't say no longer, but what they said is, this is a political campaign. They said it out and loud and clear. Wow. So it's very clear. So the point I want to make is that I think our messages have gone through, including those people. For example, COVID-19, high-dose vitamin C was incorporated with Shanghai protocol. And actually all those, including the director of the team knows me very well because I actually personally submitted the protocol.
Yeah, I remember you reporting on that, and I was so impressed that they'd embraced that in a hospital setting. Yeah.
So basically, they got the message. They were, they one way or another, they were talking about these things over these past 2 years. I keep on whatever, coming from the journals, mostly from Orthomolecular medicine boards, and publishing, sending out, telling them, because I'm impressed with all the amount of the data suddenly available over the last 2 years.
Wow.
Vitamin D, vitamin C, others, right? Because it's all clear. If you want to read it, this is good enough.
Yeah. And not just coming out of China, not just coming out of China, Richard, is it?
No, it's not. Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I think the message is getting out there, and unfortunately in China, it's more political than anything else.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, it's interesting. We live in interesting times, but I'm pleased to hear you say you're optimistic.
Actually, seriously, in the United States, I feel so. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Basically, this you have to, actually, like on the Chinese, I telling them, I said, of course, I cannot say criticize over there, but what I do is I comment on U.S. products, so they couldn't get me wrong. But, a lot of people know what I'm talking about. What I'm saying here, after all, I said that the United States, at least by the paper, on the surface, it is still a legal society. So bad guys, if they want to do things, they have to hide it. I said here on the legal side, we have to fix the legal things first. You have to have a majority in the House of Congress, one of the houses, our chamber. Then I know that they're going to do. Actually, one of the videos that I was partly involved is sent to Senator Johnson's office as part of why, for example, NIH knows about vitamin C. FDA knows.
The NIH and the FDA, yeah.
Yeah, because my report, my seminar at NIH was sent over to the Department of DHHS, Human Services.
Richard, to that point, I mean, the NH and MRC in Australia, which is the National Health and Medical Research Council, equivalent to your NIH, I think, not equivalent. Yeah. NIH is much bigger. And the FDA over there, the TGA over here, they're they have access to all of these studies.
Yeah.
It has no traction at all.
Yeah, actually, I've been working with a legal team based in London since June, actually 2 years ago, since June of 2020.
Right.
And so they've been very meticulously compiling what happened in Shanghai. I think they've gone beyond vitamin C, but using vitamin C as one example. He said, you gave this presentation, Shanghai incorporated vitamin C, and also you gave a presentation at NIH, and then I received an email from the department and the assistant secretary's office at the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States, asking me if it's okay for him to forward my, presentation to FDA and CDC. I said, sure, please. I said, I'd like to, because at that time, all I was thinking as a doctor is let's find a way to stop this thing, right?
Yes.
But then nothing happened afterwards. But I said, sure, please. So it's all on email. Anyway, long story short, coming back, the lawyer asked me what happened. I said, nothing happened. Then I said, here are the emails and everything. So actually they requested, by the Freedom of Information Act, FOA, and so the NIH responded quickly, send the copies of our communication. Basically the idea is, look, the information is over. There's clear, there's more than likely, again, my message is very clear. Vitamin C abundant research is very safe. And as a physician, we don't do no harm, right? Very safe, inexpensive, and effective for viral infections, and maybe effective for COVID-19. The question is, you have nothing better to do. You have no better treatment for COVID-19, and why in the world you don't use vitamin C?
Okay.
The information is made available to NIH, CDC, FDA, Fauci. What do you do? That's the legal question they're going to ask.
Yes, and I hope criminal charges are brought to pass, because they should be. They should be. I hope so. I hope so.
I think it will. I do have a strong sense, because this is upsetting too many people. You know?
Yes.
Way too many people.
Yeah.
We will have a victory day. Right.
I hope so, Richard. I hope so. Look, I've been humbled by being involved in this Orthomolecular News Service group. I usually just sit and watch and read, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing you and many other members on the panel, because I'm in awe of their knowledge. And but when I read this about B3, I just thought, well, I know Abraham Hoffa was big on B3, and this puts it into an evolutionary perspective that we may not have heard before.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much. Actually, coming back just the last minute is that I was so impressed with vitamin C and not vitamin D. Actually, vitamin B3 seems to me has probably far more involvement in all these. What I read, I gave a talk on this thing. I summarized the basically research available. It involves more than 50% of all biochemical reactions. And I take about 4 grams a day.
Well, I've read that. I've actually it's incorporated into a supplement that I take, but I think it deserves attention on its own.
Yeah, I take about 4 grams. I still feel a bit warm because I just took it during my dinner time. Because I exercise, research shows that can basically stimulate your muscle growth. It promotes it increases NAD plus, some of the good stuff. I said, all my purpose is try to stay healthy and live longer. Everything else comes second.
Yeah. But this is why food actually is if it's well grown, is even better. And the reason I say that is because I did this great interview with Professor Fred Provenza, who wrote a wonderful book called Nourishment. And he, it's a terrific. He's a terrific guy, and he said something which just kind of stuck in my mind. He said, "Ron, the humble strawberry has 5,000 active components. We don't know what they all do, but they probably are really important." And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of food.
Yes.
Food is that nature has spent millions of years in the laboratory packaging it all up in a really nice way that we still haven't worked out.
Yeah, actually, bringing about that nature has spent billions of years, working up a system. And for human life, agriculture, 200 years, right? Ag industry, they changed everything.
Absolutely everything. And that's what this lab-grown meat is all about as well. I mean,
I'm scared of that.
I'm scared of that too. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. Thank you, Ron. It was great.